Family is fun. Family can bring laughter. Family can be messy.
Oops.
Family can be unexpected. Family can bring joy. Family can bring a lot of feelings. Ultimately, family matters.
Hi. That ended a little faster than I thought it would. I've watched it like a dozen times. I don't know why that happened. How y'all feeling? All right. Well, okay. All right. Calm down. We're going to be here for another 45 minutes to an hour and a half. So, oh, man. All right. So we've been talking through, hold on, the June 4th thing. I want to give you a little bit more background on that. So June 4th, we're doing a prayer service, no. On June 4th, Pastor Logan is putting on a prayer service that he felt, I'm not saying that we're not supporting it. I'm saying this is something that he felt God called him to do. This is something that he felt would be impactful, and it's something that he has invited us to, but he's also invited county commissioners and principals and other people. So we're going to throw our weight behind it because we love him and we believe in what God's called him to do. But what you need to know is he's leading that, and this is his idea. And I say that to say, I think that he's leading all of us to a place of deeper spiritual intensity, and I think you should be there. I should have said this last service. I just got flustered and forgot, but I think you should be there. I think it's going to be awesome. I think it's going to be good. And let me tell you something. We've been talking about it for the last couple of weeks, and I've been trying to stay out of the planning as much as possible because I'm a control freak, and I don't want to screw up his idea. But one of the conversations that we had last week was like, what are you looking for? Are you looking for lots of people to be there, or are you concerned with the content and the context and the depth of what's going to happen there? And he was like, well, I really care about the substance more than I care about having 1 million people there. That's not to say that you shouldn't be there. That's to say that that's the point this time. We don't often do things where we go, this is only about depth, because we believe that doing the work of the gospel means bringing people to Jesus for the very first time, and that in doing that, you will find spiritual depth. However, sometimes that's appropriate to focus on that, and that is what we're going to do that night, and that's something that I think is going to be really powerful, because the whole focus is going to be about us just laying all of ourselves aside and begging that God would do something great here and now. So be there or be square. All right. Wow, I'm a dad now. We are going through this marriage or this family series. I want to draw some lines here for you so that you can kind of understand what I'm going to be talking about today. The series is called Family Matters. Basically the way that we wrote it is we all looked at each other and went, well, we don't know a whole lot about this because we're pretty new at it. Because all of us are pretty early on in having families and even in being married. And so we're like, what do we think are the areas that are crucial, that maybe should improve or that are like crucial to a marriage or family going well? And we went and listed them out. And the way that it played out, there are some of these areas that we talk about that like, they're very whole family oriented, communication, love, all of that, even unity. That starts with mom and dad or with husband and wife, but it does not end there. It can extend to the rest of the family. Now, we're going to talk today about service. And I would submit to you that if you feel convicted that you should serve your kids better, there's a 98% chance you're already doing an awesome job at it. Because those that don't take care of their children well don't often think that they should take care of their children better, right? It's a little awkward, but it's just true, right? So really today you need to be focusing on your relationship with your spouse in this, because where we're going to end up is that we're going to end up in how do we fill our cup, right? Your life is, if you view your life as a glass, you're constantly pouring out energy. You're constantly pouring out yourself into the things that you're doing. And at the end of the day, like when it comes down to it, I would be willing to bet that the majority of the fights you have is just that one of you has a cup that's too empty. And you just don't know how to get it filled back up, and you expect the other person to try to help you do that, and they're not doing it the way that you want them to. Right? Like, that's just, last night, I got to get ready for today. I'm trying to get my head straight. I'm also exhausted. I also have a headache. Both girls wake up in the middle of the night for no reason. Actually, no, Nora never fell asleep. Nora looked at me and said, "Daddy, I can't sleep." And I said, "Why?" And she goes, "My tummy doesn't know how to." And I said, "That's not a real thing. Go to sleep." And then 10 minutes later, "Daddy, my tummy doesn't know how to sleep." Go to sleep. And by the end of it, I am a grumpy jerk, right? And I'm laying in bed, and both girls are rolling around, and I'm huffing and puffing, and it's just, I got 4 people in a bed that's made for 2. Well, it's a king-size bed, but there's only supposed to be 2 people in it. And I could sleep in a whole king-size bed by myself. And Amanda can too, because she sleeps sideways. So actually, I sleep in about 18 inches. But anyway, literally, she's half my size, and she takes up twice as much space. But but I love her, and that's not the point. That's not what we're talking about. So both of the girls sleep like her. So Lottie literally kicked me in the face in her sleep last night, like the whole thing, right? And so at the end of the day, what happens? Well, Amanda's not doing anything wrong. The girls aren't doing anything wrong. They're little kids. I'm just grumpy. Why? Because I'm about to be pouring my cup out, and I need somebody to fill it up. I need somebody to go to sleep so I can sleep myself. We've all kind of been there, right? And more often than not, what happens in families, at least that I've seen, is that what happens is everything else is louder than your spouse when it comes to this stuff. Everything else is just louder than your spouse. The bills are louder. The broken down car is louder. The mortgage, your kids are louder. Your kids are definitely louder, right? And when I say, like, you probably, if you feel convicted that you should take better care of your kids, when I preach this, you probably are somebody who's taking good care of them. I'm not trying to be a jerk here, but like at the end of the day, we've turned our children into the whole point of our lives, and they are a huge part of our lives, but the whole point of our lives on a day-to-day earthly level, that's actually our spouse. And if that's not right first, what ends up happening? The marriage fractures, the family fractures, and nobody is whole, right? And so you know, we don't often focus correctly, and it's, and look, it's easy, right? This is a story that when I was a kid, it's easy to get distracted from that. When I was a kid, the one thing that used to drive me nuts about my mom is she would always do this thing. She would pick up something that I left downstairs. She would sit it on the bottom step of the stairs, and then she would walk up the stairs. And then when she got to the top of the stairs, she would yell, "Hey, come get your stuff and bring it upstairs." Yeah, that's annoying, right? And, I'm 12 years old, so I'm doing all the 12-year-old boy things. I'm like, but I'm afraid of my dad, right? Don't want to get in trouble. So I'm all mad. I'm like punching the air, like, And it took me until recently to figure out why that happens, because I watch all of the stuff that Amanda does, and I realized that my mom left all of my stuff at the bottom of the stairs because if she took one more of my things to my room ever again, she might hit me in the face. That's a silly little thing, but it's a way that your kids can just be louder, because you walk into the house, I don't have this problem because I'm a pig. Like, my car looks like Chick-fil-A and Walmart exploded in the back. So like, I don't have this problem, but if you're somebody who needs like a space that's not cluttered, like that's always, your kids are always gonna be loud because you're always gonna be cleaning up after them. So service, it's between, really, where we probably need to improve is between husband and wife. So we're gonna jump out of Ruth, and I'm gonna paraphrase this whole story for you. And I don't often do that. I don't like to do that. I like to read. But it's 4 chapters. And we really will be here till 1 o'clock if I don't paraphrase it. But I'm going to give you some idea, and then we're going to unpack it a little bit. So here's the deal with Ruth. The book is called Ruth, and the book is called Ruth because Ruth does something amazing, and in doing something amazing, she gets venerated by God, and she ends up in the family line of Jesus. And so the book is called Ruth. The story is about Ruth, but if you really unpack the story, there's a central figure that sits dead in the middle of it, and her name is Naomi. Naomi is Ruth's mother-in-law, and Naomi, all parties in this story are trying to figure out how to best serve Naomi. And so this is what happens. It's early on in the nation of Israel. They're living under what they call judges. Essentially, judges are leaders that rise up, that God appoints, that are the civilization during that time for the Israelites would have been kind of a theocracy. So you would have had civil law and religious law together. And these judges oversee that. And what happens is the Israelites don't necessarily follow God all the time. So they'll get into a jam. And then God will raise up a great judge. This judge will come in and bail them out. So like if you've heard the story of Samson or you've heard the story of Gideon or any of those, then they were judges, right? So during the time of the judges, Naomi and her husband Elimelech and their 2 sons, they're experiencing famine where they live. And they decide, you know what, we're leaving. We're leaving town, and we're going to move to Moab because in Moab, at least there's food, and we need food. So they move to Moab, and they settle in there, and the 2 boys get married. The 2 boys get married. One of the daughter-in-law's name is Orpah, and the other is Ruth, right? And over the course of time, Elimelech dies, and then the 2 sons die. So now what you have 3 widows. During this time, that would have been really rough. Now, it was okay-ish probably because the 2 daughters-in-law are with their families in Moab. And so they're cared for enough. But then, all of a sudden, Naomi decides she wants to move back to Israel. She finds out that the famine's over and she wants to move back. The way that she presents it to the daughters-in-law, she says, I'm leaving, you stay here. And both of them start breaking down. They're like, no way, don't leave. They must have a really good relationship. Obviously not today. That's not a normal thing today, I don't know. I've heard things. My mom and Amanda get along great, but I've heard other things from other places. But they have a unique relationship. And they have a great relationship, so they don't want her to leave. No, don't leave. And she turns and she looks at them and she goes, how can I help you? Like, I can't take care of you. My husband's dead. I'm a widow. My sons are dead, and now you're widows. And if I were to even, because customarily, their next husbands were supposed to come from the family line of Naomi in one way or the other. And so, specifically Elimelech. And so what I can't do anything. If I were to get pregnant today and have a child, have twins, the 2 of you would have to wait years and years to marry them. You won't be taken care of. I can do nothing for you. And so Naomi's like, I'm leaving. I need to go. I'm weighing you down. And Orpah, she says, okay, and she goes. And then Ruth says no. And there's this whole passage. I'll read it to you. Ruth's response is this. She says, don't urge me to leave you or turn back from you. Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if even death separates you and me. Ruth says no. Now, there are a lot of reasons that Ruth would want to stay with Naomi. One of them is she's going back to this land. Who's going to care for her? She's an elderly person. She needs help to provide. And in this time, she would have had to go find food, find all of these things. Like, yeah, they still have the land. They're going back to the family land. Yes, she's going to be surrounded by family. But who's going to be directly there taking care of Naomi? This could have been one of the reasons. They could have just had a great relationship and she didn't want to lose her. You don't really know. The Bible doesn't really tell you that. But anyway, Ruth goes with Naomi and they move back. And then you have this moment and Ruth says, I'm gonna go in the fields and I'm gonna go collect grain. I'm gonna go try to get us some food. And in this moment, when this happens, like that's kind of a big deal. They're basically the poorer people. The law said that the poorer people would go behind the landowners and the farmers, and they could collect grain that fell on the ground. And there was a specific amount that the farmers were to kind of leave behind, and it was a generosity thing, and it was actually part of the law. So many people would do this, and Ruth is amongst a handful of women who are doing this thing. And so she goes and she's picking up the grain, right? And so then what happens is the owner of the land, his name is Boaz. Boaz actually shows up. He comes in from out of town, and she goes home and she's like, oh, this great guy, his name was Boaz. He helped us out, and we got the food and now we're good. And he even sent some extra home with us because he found out that Ruth was Naomi's daughter-in-law. And so Naomi goes, oh my goodness, that is one of our kinsman redeemers. What that would mean is that he's someone who could marry Ruth and inherit Elimelech's land, and then they would be set. They would be okay. And so Naomi gives Ruth instructions about how to kind of deal with the whole situation. She goes, she does it again. They come back, and then Naomi goes, okay, this is what you're going to do. It's the strangest first date ever. You're going to sneak into the threshing floor, and you're going to lay down at his feet. She's putting the moves on him. I don't know. It's weird. And Boaz wakes up, and he's like, what are you doing here? And she goes, you're one of my kinsman redeemers. Like, you can marry me. Would you marry me? And can you basically save us? And Boaz goes, first of all, nobody should know you were here, because this is weird. But secondly, there's one guy who's in line ahead of me. I'll talk to him in the morning. And so Boaz goes and talks to the other guy in the family who's ahead of him. And the way that this would have worked is, as a kinsman redeemer, you get the land, right? You care for the widow, and and that's kind of how it works. That's the trade-off, right? So he goes, hey, Elimelech died. Naomi's back in town. You're one of these redeemers. Can you want to take her on and take the land? And the guy goes, yeah, absolutely. Absolutely, I want to do that. Let's do it. And then Boaz goes, but wait, you also will have to marry her daughter-in-law, Ruth. And he goes, well, I can't do that. That would put my wealth and possessions at risk. I'm not going to do that. And Boaz goes, great, I will. And then they all lived happily ever after. Right? Kind of weird story. It's the best first date ever. Nobody ever try that for your first date. That's creepy. Especially if you're a dude. Please don't do that. But the Bible said it. Sir, you're going to jail. Anyway. Cultural context is important. The deal here is you have those who are serving and those who are being served in this story. So I'm going to break it down this way. All right. So, right, we're gonna just go here. Your heart, your disposition when you're serving, generally you can have a half empty or a half full disposition. Does this make sense? Right? And then being served. Right? You've met people who, when they're served, it's kind of endless. There's no bottom. They're never satisfied. Doesn't matter what you do for them. They're never going to be okay. Can you guys see this? I can move it back. All right. So, and then you've met people who just never quite seem satisfied. Like they're always kind of okay, but they're never quite fully okay, no matter what you do for them. Like it's kind of there's always another problem. There's always something bigger than what you just did for them, right? I would venture to guess that in your marriage, these things can become issues periodically, right? So I'll give you some examples as we go through here, and I'll tie it back to the story. So let's start with the half empty, right? Someone who's willing to serve, and I need to do a disclaimer that I forgot about. I'm assuming that love is in the center of your marriage and that you are still willing to serve one another. That is an assumption. Now, that might be an unfair assumption. If it's an unfair assumption, you should probably go to marital counseling. And I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm not trying to make a joke. I mean that seriously. I'm assuming that is still at the center of your marriage and that love is the starting place, so you desire to serve one another, all right? Now, if there's probably moments in this when you serve and you serve only out of obligation. Fair enough? Yeah. There are times when you're willing to serve the other person, but you're only going to do it out of obligation, right? So that's what we're going to put here. And I'm going to make it short so I don't misspell anything. So you're only going to do it out of obligation, right? Now, this happens, and look, let's be practical, right? You marry somebody, you want to be with them for a lifetime. There are going to be moments when you're like, yeah, I'm willing to do it, but only because I'm supposed to, right? There's just going to be times when that's the case. But if you always live there, you will never appreciate what's in front of you. Now, imagine in this story, Ruth, right? So Ruth decides, I'm going with Naomi, period. That's what I'm doing. I'm going with Naomi. We're going to do this, right? Now, like I said, there are multiple possibilities here. She could have really loved Naomi and didn't want to leave her alone. Or she could have gone out of a sense of duty because who's going to take care of this lady? We don't know the health circumstances Naomi's in. We don't know how old she is. We don't know any of these things. So she could have done it only out of a sense of duty. Now, had Ruth only ever done it out of a sense of duty, what do you think is going to happen over the course of time? She's going to resent her. She's going to begin to resent Naomi, right? It's just the way that works. You get bitter. Duty does not carry you nearly as far as love does, right? And so what we must assume is that Ruth loved her, served her sacrificially, right? If you're willing to serve the other party in your marriage, if you're willing to serve your spouse sacrificially, you get to a point where your whole... let me tell you a story. So I grew up... I'm 4 years older than Steven. I'm 7 years older than Josh, my brothers. And I'm the oldest of the cousins. I have a couple of, half cousins, and they're older than me. But of my close family, I'm the only person in my family that really got to hang out with my Pawpaw Gray before he took up residence on his lazy boy, right? And I'm not trying to be a jerk about him. He was a good man, so hear me on that. That's not what I'm saying. But it would also be a lie to say that he didn't live the last 20 years of his life pretty much on the recliner. And so this is kind of... Pawpaw Gray was a really good dude. I mean, he dropped out of school in the 8th grade to help care for the family and work on the farm. He became a construction guy. He oversaw jobs. I mean, I had a job in construction for a little bit, so he talked to me about all of the places he built in Kannapolis. And he built a bunch of churches, a bunch of other buildings. He did all this stuff. And he worked hard. And when my grandma was kind of down on her luck and she had just had her and her first husband had split and she had these 2 little kids, Pawpaw Gray comes along, and now there's a provider, there's a caretaker, there's a whole family, right? So he's a good man. But what happened was he did physical labor his whole life. And then his body started breaking down. He ended up busting his back up, then he drove a truck for a while, and then that just got worse and worse and worse. And so when I came along, we hung out. He took me and did stuff. I used to ride with him on the lawnmower. He had a tent. This is crazy. So he had the Lowe's Yardman lawnmower. That was the nice one. That was the high-class one. And then he had the Walmart one. That was the cheap one. It was busted up. He bought his Yardman, and he connected it to the Walmart one with angle iron, and he mowed in tandem. And I rode the back lawnmower. So, I couldn't do anything. I wasn't in charge of nothing, but I thought it was cool. And that was, growing up, we did stuff like that, So over time, it just got worse and worse. And he ended up having a heart attack. So then it just even worse. To the point, eventually, the last year of his life, he's barely talking and he's barely doing anything. Everything just started shutting down. Now, Mama Brenda, that's my dad's mom, she's a saint. I've probably said this in here before. She's a saint, and if anybody says anything mean about him, I hit him, about her. I love her. And she absolutely is. She worked 35 years in teaching kindergarten. After that, she retired, and essentially what happened was she became the caretaker for my grandpa. Now, here's the holdup. He was capable of taking care of himself in the life he had chosen to live, but he never had to because she always did. Well, chosen or had been forced to is kind of a little bit of both, but he could take care of himself, but she always took care of him. So I'm not joking when I say probably 10 or 15 years, she was at home, retired, and hardly ever left the house except to go to the grocery store or church. She didn't hang out with very many friends. She didn't come visit us up here in Maryland all that much. She didn't do very much of any of that because he couldn't or wouldn't leave the house. I was there the night that Papa Gray passed, and all the way up until that moment, she's still taking care of him. This 72-year-old lady, 73-year-old lady at the time is literally flipping the sheets for him underneath of him. He was a pretty big man, and she's rolling him around and moving the sheets all by herself. I pray that none of you ever have to experience that, because that's a long, slow grind. But let me tell you something. I've never heard her complain. I've never heard her be bitter about it. I've never heard her be upset about it. The only thing she said after he passed away that was even a little bit selfish, she looked at my dad and my aunt and said, "I'm not spending one night in this house by myself. You moved me out after the funeral." That is what sacrificial service looks like. So, when you unpack this story, if you want to be cynical, you could assume maybe that Ruth and Boaz, because at the end, Boaz is the kinsman redeemer, right? So maybe Boaz is chosen to take all this on out of obligation. I need to take care of Naomi, and I need to take care of Ruth, and the land is just kind of a plus. Maybe you can believe that, but here's the thing. Ruth gets put in the family line of Jesus through Boaz, which means that biblically that's an elevated position that's given to these two people. And so because that is an elevated position that's given to these two people, what you must assume is that these actions are done in sacrificial love and in sacrificial service. They are done with a good heart, with a heart that is entirely oriented to the other, right? So if you can serve sacrificially and not just out of obligation, you can have a half full glass. Now, here's the problem. In your marriage, if you're only ever serving, but you're not being served, your glass is only half full. So, let's get to this side. You have people that have no bottom, and you have people that have a cracked glass. Now, Naomi is going to serve as the example for this, but Naomi is not necessarily... we're going to use the bad version of Naomi because Naomi in this story is perfect at it. So here's the first thing that happens. I'll read it to you. Ruth says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people and your God, my God." And then Naomi realized Ruth was determined to go with her, so she stopped urging her. She knew that Naomi was going to go with her, so she stopped urging her. She knew that Ruth was going to go with her, so she stopped urging her. Being served requires permission. If you want to be served, you have to give permission. Does this make sense? Now, there are those people that that like they don't allow themselves to ever be served because it's like a point of pride that they do everything. You know what I mean? And look, that's super. My grandma was that way. My other grandma, Mama Debbie. She was a Korean lady, and she that's a cultural thing. You in her culture, you serve, you take care of the grandfather, like you take care of the husband, right? And that's just what she did, like to the point that like she took very good care of him. She fed him a lot. He got real big. And she fed me a lot, and I got kind of big too. And that was just her thing, right? And it was not often that she was served herself, because you sit down for dinner and everybody else is eating, and she's up preparing things for people to eat still, and she barely eats herself. Like there are some people who are like that, and if you are like that, then like you do need to slow down, because you're not allowing your spouse to help fill your cup. You're not allowing your spouse to help take care of you, right? And then there are the practical things. So I talked last week, right? I didn't realize that I talked about this last week, and I started talking about it only in this service, so I started talking about it in the last service, and people were judging me. I could feel the nails and the knives. But last week I said that I don't clean the counters in my house anymore, right? If you weren't here, there's a reason. I don't clean the counters in my house anymore because I leave streaks on the counters. And since I leave streaks on the counters, Amanda's like, goes in behind me and cleans behind me because she's fixing the streaks. Because the streaks drive her nuts. I don't have permission to clean the counters. Right? Now that sounds super stupid. But let me tell you something. If all it took to make my wife happy was cleaning the counters, I'd be a happy man. It'd be real easy. So I'm not saying that I'm too lazy to clean the counters. What I'm saying is I don't have permission, right? Now, is that something that we should absolutely fix? Or is that something that we should just be like, it's okay? Well, I'll give you the answer. It took us 2 years to figure out why to be okay with it. So we would go through this whole rigmarole. I would clean the counters. She'd come by behind me and clean the counters an hour or two later. And I would just be like, what the heck? What are you doing? Why? And then we go back and forth. And it would always end up in this bickering of like, I don't even know why I help. You don't want my help. And she'd just be like, no, that's not what I'm saying. And we're not listening to each other. We're just talking at this point, and it's nothing. It's just, it becomes a nothing fight, and it's stupid. And then finally one day, I'm like not upset. And I'm just like, because I had stopped cleaning the counters, so that's why I wasn't upset anymore. And I'm like, somehow we got into the conversation, and I'm just like, why? And she goes, well, you're going to be mad at me. And when I say one day we had this conversation, I mean like 6 months ago. And she goes, well, you're going to be mad at me. And I'm like, at this point, like, you think I'm too stupid to clean counters, so I don't know. I probably won't be that mad. It can't get much worse than that. And she goes, you leave streaks. And I went, okay, I'll do the other stuff. Here's the problem. There are people who are generally unwilling to be served, but then there are those of us that want to be served, right? But there are some things that we just don't want other people to do. That's fine, but you have to communicate. You have to have the conversation. And I'm not blaming that on Amanda. She's here. I'm not blaming it on her at all. Like, because I would get too mad for her to feel safe to say, you leave streaks. Right? She didn't feel okay saying you leave streaks because I'm over here like, Chick-fil-A, I worked at Chick-fil-A, I never gave anybody salmonella, you know? And she's just like, that's not the point. You know what I mean? Like, I'm like, dude, if a multi-billion-dollar company says I can clean their counters, why can't I clean these? And that was never the point. I don't like the streaks. I would rather just do it myself. There are going to be places where that happens, but here's the thing. If you're the one that's being served, you have to communicate that. And if you're the one who's trying to serve, you have to be willing to listen. Because if not, this is what happens. You have a cup with no bottom. You have a cup with no bottom. It completely negates all of this right here. It's never full. It's not even half full. It's not even half empty. It's all the way empty. Why? Because nothing's ever coming my way. And then you have cracked. So there's Naomi. Naomi, she needs the help. She's accepted the fact that she needs help, but also she needs the help to figure out how to feed themselves, right? Like Ruth is moving into a completely new culture. Naomi knows the culture, and she knows that there are these laws in place that will allow them to have food. And she also knows that there are these laws in place that will allow them to have a provider, right? And so she recognizes that they need help. But what ends up happening is she has to tell Ruth how to do it. She has to tell Ruth how to provide the help because Ruth doesn't know. Ruth doesn't know. She doesn't know how to work all these angles. She has no idea who Boaz is. She might not have even known that she could pick up the grains that are left behind on the field. She didn't know. And so Naomi has to give her instruction. And Naomi has to set this up for her. Naomi, to be served, to be cared for, has to give instruction. Sometimes being served requires instruction. That's a weird one. But this is what happens when we're unwilling to give instruction. When we're unwilling to give instruction, we get served, but we don't get served in a way we like. Or when we're unwilling to give instruction, the person's like, I want to help you. Just let me help you. Help me help you. Help me help you, right? And the response is, if I have to help you, it's not even worth it. I can be that way. I can be that way. If I have to explain things, I get mad. There's so many times that I've been in a conversation, usually with Amanda, or also with my mom and dad, because usually conversations that get that intimate or whatever are close people, and I'll be trying to explain what I need or trying to explain, and the question usually is like, well, what do you mean by that? And as soon as that happens, I'm like, I'm done. Because more often than not, like the way I need to be served, the way I need help is like emotionally. And, I told you, I'm a pig, and so I'm messy, right? Like the day-to-day, it's not really that big of a deal for me. Like the all of that stuff, it's just not. Like when we got married, Amanda was like, I'm doing all the laundry, don't touch it. And I was like, why? And she was like, your clothes always smell like the floor. And I was like, oh, fair enough. So when I need help, I need to be able to talk through stuff. I need that, that's one of the things, anyway. So but as soon as Amanda starts asking questions or somebody starts asking questions and I have to re-explain what I've already tried to say, I'm like, I can't do it. So then what happens? Well, I feel loved because I've been asked and I've been given the opportunity to talk, but it's incomplete because I've walked away. Right? So I would guess that what you really just want out of your marriage is to be loved, to be respected, and for it to be a relationship that fills your cup up. For it to be a relationship that's restorative. For it to be a relationship that's healing. For it to be a relationship that's fun. And a lot of it comes back to this. A lot of it comes back to service. Because at the end of the day, you're looking at the other person and you're like, we're in this together. But it gets really easy to compare who's doing more and who's doing less. Who's working in the wrong spots and not paying attention to what you need, whatever. And then you build resentment, you build bitterness, and you've driven a wedge into your marriage because it's just the cup's not being filled. This isn't fulfilling for me. Right? It's either I do everything I do out of obligation, or I don't even want the help, or if I have to tell you, it's not worth it. And what I would say is having a full cup, I'm going to have to erase either way, actually. There's a whole picture on the back. Having a full cup requires humility. This eraser is terrible. We're just going to get it clean enough. All right. It requires humility so that you're able to communicate what you need, even though it's humiliating sometimes. It requires effort. It requires hard work. It requires all of these things. Ultimately, if you want to have a full cup, you have to be what we've assumed, right? Full cup. You have to be what we're going to go ahead and assume Boaz and Ruth and Naomi are all being. You have to be sacrificial, right? Sacrificial. So when you look at the other, you're willing to sacrifice anything to take care of them. And you're not going to worry. You're not going to compare. You're not going to allow yourself to believe that the other person isn't picking up their end of the bargain, even if they aren't. See, here's the thing. When the Bible speaks about marriage, in the New Testament specifically, with Paul always takes marriage back to the relationship between Jesus and the church. And so if we're going to do that, let's go ahead and do that. So the relationship between Jesus and the church. Jesus came, and his whole existence was to serve the church. You're like, that's weird. Well, no, it is. We are the church, and his whole existence was to forgive us of our sins so that we could have a relationship with him, walk in the power of the Holy Spirit, and be reconciled to God the Father. That is the whole idea. And so that's why he came. He came to serve the church. He lived entirely sacrificially. He lived 30 years, and then he did 3 years of ministry. And in those 3 years, that's all he did was sacrifice. That was his whole deal. He walked. Do you think any human being would want to walk around followed by a couple hundred people, sometimes thousands of people all the time? Do you think any human being would want to look at these dudes that you've been performing miracles with for weeks and say, we need food? And they go, we don't have any. We don't know what to do. And it's like, dude, we've been healing people. Like, give me some bread. I'll take care of it. Like, do you think that that's sacrificial living? Right? That's what he did. He went to the cross. It was all sacrificial, right? And so in this case, if you want to live in a marriage that looks like that, you should view yourself as the one who has to sacrifice. And if both parties view themselves as the one who has to sacrifice always, then both parties will be served equally. But even still, if both parties don't view it that way, John chapter 13, verse 34 and 35. A new command I give to you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. So if we're supposed to love one another, we're supposed to live sacrificially for our spouse. And the only way that our spouse can see the light then is that they see how we live, how we love, and how we sacrifice. Then they will be able to see through. And if they can't, oh well. Jesus gave us our job to do. That's what we do. So we live sacrificially. We serve sacrificially. We have to be sacrificial. We have to be, I did not leave enough space. That C is way too big. We have to be communicative. Yeah, this is whatever. That's why I don't sign birthday cards. Amanda writes from the Hilsons, because if I did, it'd be from the Hilsons. And then we have to be communicative. If we start by being sacrificial with one another, by serving one another sacrificially, what happens? We begin to build trust. We begin to build a stronger relationship. We begin to see the value in the other. If you are living sacrificially and serving sacrificially, even though and your heart is oriented towards the other in love and service, then you'll see the value in that other person, even if they're not reciprocating it. Right? But when it becomes reciprocal and it all works, then what happens? You begin to build stronger trust. You begin to build stronger bonds. You begin to build the ability to have conversations. And instead of it taking like 2 years to figure out that the freaking counters have streaks on them, you can figure that out in a week. Why? Because you've built trust. You can communicate with one another. You know how the other one wants to be served. You know what the other one needs, and they know what you need, and you trust that they're going to give you what you need, and you trust that they trust that you're going to give them what they need, and it works. And all of a sudden, something that you thought was broken starts to mend itself. But it all starts with choosing to take up your cross and act like Jesus to your spouse. Can we pray together? God, we thank you. We thank you for the example you set. We thank you for the people that you put in our lives. And Lord, I just pray, God, I pray that you would put a desire, a passion, and a love inside of each one of us, that we'd be willing to live sacrificially for our spouses. God, I pray that that would be something that's reciprocated. And God, I pray that you give us the humility and the strength to communicate. And God, I just pray that for every marriage and family in this room, God, that you would begin to build stronger and stronger and stronger bonds. For the ones that are doing great, God, I pray they'd be doing better. And for the ones that are doing bad, I pray they'd be doing better. And for the ones that are holding on just barely by a thread, I pray that you just start adding threads till they're doing better, till they're doing good, till they're doing great. God, I just pray that we would have strong families, strong marriages, and strong testimonies, not because we're awesome, not because we're super sacrificial, not because we're anything other than following you and obedient to you.